The Canola School on RealAgriculture.com is brought to you by BASF Canada and Invigor Hybrid Canola.
I'm Amber Bell, and this is Real Agriculture. Today for this episode of Canola School, I'm with Leigh-Ann Harder of BASF. She's a technical service specialist, and we're going to be talking about how to actually recognize that yield at maturity, so making sure that your yield actually gets into your bin. So welcome, Leigh-Ann. It's great to see you.
Good to see you.
Okay, so let's open this up, and I think the big question on a lot of growers' minds is swath versus straight cut. So let's start with that big question right off the bat.
For sure. So I think there's a lot of factors that go into whether or not an operation is swath or straight cut. I think that, making that decision ultimately starts back in the spring when you're choosing which hybrids you're going to grow, whether or not they are including things like that pod shatter reduction trait that exists in some of the Invigors, and lots of other companies are also bringing that into their breeding systems now too, bred through very many different ways. So whether or not you're choosing to grow a hybrid that does have that rating or choosing to grow a hybrid that isn't recommended for straight cut, so you're kind of setting that up back in the spring. I think there's a lot of things that evolve over the season that might influence your decision to change your mind or continue on your path. But at the end of the day, I think it's making sure that you're recognizing that you're protecting your yield when it comes time to harvest. So whether or not it has a harvest protection aid in it or it doesn't will probably lead a lot to whether or not they're choosing to go swath or straight cut.
And now coming into the field, I mean, there's been variability in weather patterns across the prairies.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know if it's more so than most years, but it feels like it.
Yeah.
So coming into the field, what are growers looking for to really make that key decision on timing, on what they're going to do with their harvest?
For sure. So I think that if they're choosing to swath, or they are an operation that still prefers to swath, even if they are growing straight cut varieties that do have that pod shatter protection in it, you're looking at whether or not you want to do that 60% seed color change, which is the minimum recommendation, because earlier than that there can be yield penalties, just not allowing your seed to fill in properly, as well as some quality concerns with green seed, and allowing it to go past that 60% seed color change if you are opting to swath and have straight cut hybrids. It's just allowing it to really fill in. Mentioning like weather variability, and I think this year, especially in this area of Saskatchewan too, it's like, we had limited rainfall after seeding, so we had some really split staging. So allowing your field to, even if you are a straight cut operation, to like really allow that to even out and come into maturity more uniformly, and having that protection for your yield with the pod shatter and stuff, it allows you to recognize that. So it might be why you want to push it and let it go to straight cut. Or same thing, you might, it's getting later into your season and there's frost in the forecast, or temperatures are really dipping. You might say, yeah, I'm still going to swath it, but delay swath at normal timing. So really it comes down to risk mitigation for your operation, I think, at the end of the day. So there's benefits and risks to both. Leaving it stand, again, weird weather with hail events happening later on in the year. High winds at harvest can cause things like pod, shattering and pod drop. Same thing can be said with swathing. Swathing, wind moving swaths and stuff like that. So I think that it ultimately comes down to risk mitigation for that grower and what they're seeing as in their own field in kind of a case-by-case situation.
Right. And let's talk a little bit about hail, because there has been a fair bit of that.
Yeah.
What has that looked like in the decision-making process?
Yeah, so I think it also really depends when you get hail, and again, evaluated probably on a case-by-case situation. If you had minor hail when you had very little seed color change, if you were planning on straight cut as your harvest management or harvest practice, then you can still let it go and evaluate. If you have damage to the pods, and especially that middle layer of the pod that's kind of keeping the two valves together, if you have known damage there, you can see damage, maybe you will be tempted to swath it and still let it stand. Again, I think it should probably be a case-by-case evaluation of what kind of severity you had when you had the severity and stuff like that.
What would the opportunity be for growers who didn't plant pod shatter traits in the spring? What would be their opportunity to do straight cutting? Is there value in that?
Again, I think that it's going to come down to where their risk levels are at. So, probably prior to even the introduction of pod shatter hybrids, there were definitely growers who were opting to just straight cut and take that risk level with them of just that you will have loss or likely have loss. Because, you know, we think of pod shatter even just on like the environmental implications of it, of like high winds, like hail events, even heavy rain, right? But there's also the mechanical side of it. So when you're going in there with that reel, and you can actually cause quite a bit of damage when you go in. So not having that protection does just open up the door for the loss. And again, at the end of the day, all that seed that's shelling out on the ground is seed that's not getting into the bin.
So let's talk about regional differences and sort of where the industry is going, where it's at, and what that looks like across the prairies.
Yeah, for sure. So I think since the introduction of like some of the first pod shatter material 10, 11 years ago or so, I think we've really seen an uptake of it across the whole prairies. And I do think that we've seen a behavioral change to moving to straight cut. Like, you know, when you're driving out here, you see majority of your canola is still standing. It's fully ripe and mature. However, I think there is that regional differentiation, especially as you go north. So when you've got those really long days, in my travels and most I see that swath, even if it is having pod shatter protection in it, is in those northern reaches. And I do believe there's some statistics on it where, you know, northern Alberta is more swath versus southern Alberta. And it's kind of that belt that follows along the more northern regions of the provinces. And I think that comes down to there's a threshold that growers are going to reach where they're like, I need to get this in the bin. And, you know, big heavy plant material is going to take time to dry down. It's going to, even if you are using a pre-harvest aid in the form of a herbicide or a desiccant. So there might reach a point where they're like, I need to get this started, and will go in and swath. They might still choose to go in at 80% seed color change, or they might go in at 60% seed color change. But I do think that will play a role in what their decision ultimately is. And the same thing, like I said, with forecasts, like if you're like, oh, it's going to freeze in like 10 days, and this is at 60%, it is at physiological maturity, I can cut it. If it means protecting your yields, it's the right decision for your business.
Mm-hmm. So let's talk a little bit about pre-harvest aids when you're planning to straight cut. What would that look like for growers?
Yeah, so I think, again, that's like a multifaceted question, and it really depends on what they're seeing in their field. So again, like years like this year where we had some pretty intense split staging in areas, you know, growers were going and doing their in-crop apps, and you had really big flushes of weeds coming later on in the season. Choosing to do a harvest aid, whether it's a herbicide or a desiccant, really allows that grower to go in and try and manage what's most important for them. So, and it also comes down to timing. So there are multiple different harvest aids out there. All have different timings of application. So, you know, if the grower is choosing to go in with just Roundup, it's usually they can target at the same time as seed color change, so that's 60% seed color change, because it takes about 2 weeks for that plant to, you know, really translocate the herbicide throughout the whole plant to dry it down. Things like heat, LQ, that is a contact herbicide, so it's really going to take care of a lot of your weed control in there, as well as dry down your plant in a quicker timeline. And then desiccants, they're an acid, so they're not going to give you the weed control that you will get from a herbicide, but they will dry down your plant really quickly and allow you to go in that 3 to 5 days post spray. When it comes to those pre-harvest aids, it is important to, you know, be reading the label, watching your post-harvest intervals, and whether or not it's actually applicable to that crop, because you don't want to run into those barriers with trading after.
Any words of encouragement for growers as we move into the season where we're going to be getting canola in the bin right away here?
Yeah, for sure. So be safe through harvest. It's a busy time of year. We've worked really hard to get to this point in the year. And I think get really excited about the new technologies that are coming down their way when it comes to helping them grow canola to recognize that maximum yield potential.
What are some of the new technologies?
You know, so I think we've really touched on pod shatter. It's not new by any stretch, but, you know, continuing that evolution, and, you know, now we're starting to talk a little bit about pod drop, which is another unique trait that's kind of more conventionally bred into some of our hybrids that really allow for us to, you know, maximize that yield potential, as well as some really cool, exciting things coming from a disease perspective.
That's terrific. I can't wait to hear more. Awesome. And that was Leigh-Ann Harder on Real Agriculture.